But that's all the arthrogryposis stuff. So let's talk a little bit about Connor's autism assessment. Hello friends, welcome back to another video. As you can tell by the title, this video is going to be all things Connor and all things arthrogryposis. If you are new to my channel and you clicked on it because 1, you were curious about arthrogryposis multiplex congenita, 2, autism, or 3, you're just intrigued by my channel, let me introduce myself and why I started this channel. So to start off, my name is Jolene Renee, and I'm so thankful that you guys are here and that you clicked on this video. It really does mean a lot to me that you are here supporting my channel. I am married to my best friend Brenton, and together we have 3 most beautiful children. Connor, he's turning 6 here in a couple of weeks. Lillian, she is turning 3 in November, and Brielle turning 2 in November. And so we are very, very busy, but we couldn't ask for a more fulfilled and blessed home. But the reason for this video, Connor was born with a condition called ARTHROGRYPOSIS MULTIPLEX CONGENITA, which basically means muscle contractures, and he is affected in his shoulders, his arms, his elbows, his wrists, his hands, his fingers, his left leg and his left foot, his knee, his foot, and his jaw. So basically, to sum it up, he's got his right leg, which isn't affected, doesn't have arthrogryposis, doesn't have a club foot, is a totally normal, healthy, functioning leg. So we call it his one good limb. And yeah, so he is the reason for today's video. Every year since I've been doing YouTube, in June, I do a video all about his arthrogryposis, kind of like a one and done update, because June is World Clubfoot Awareness Month. Well, June 3rd is World Clubfoot Awareness Day, and June 30th is Arthrogryposis Multiplex Congenita Awareness Day. And so June is basically that month where we like to spread awareness on the condition that Connor has and the disability he has to live with. So to start, I would say go back and maybe watch some of my other arthrogryposis videos, but I can start from the beginning. So to start, when Connor was born, we were in BC Children's Hospital NICU for 3 weeks because when he came out, we're like, oh, his limbs don't look normal, and he had an infection. So we got transferred straight to BC Children's Hospital for his care there. And that's where we got his diagnosis of arthrogryposis multiplex congenita, or for short, AMC. And there we started doing hand splinting for his hands and his arms and his wrists. I'm gonna go back in some of my footage and see if I can find them, because then I'll throw them here so you guys can see what his limbs looked like at birth. And so they checked his jaw, and the surgeon, she's actually a plastic surgeon who was keeping an eye on his jaw or examining it when he was an infant, said if she were to do an x-ray on it, she didn't, but because she's fairly familiar with this, if she were to do an x-ray on it, both sides would be, excuse me, both sides would be fully developed, but his one side would be just a little bit smaller, and I do believe it is his left side. I'm trying to remember what side of his mouth doesn't open as far, and I do think it is his left side. It's just smaller. So she said there's nothing they can do about that surgically until he's done growing. So when I was on the AMC Facebook group, because I'm part of a few, I did ask on there, what will his future look like with eating? And a lot of adults who have arthrogryposis said to this day they stick to soft foods because it is harder for them to chew. And that's with Connor. He's already 6 years old and he is only eating softer foods. Things like carrots he cannot eat, potato chips, depending on the chip he cannot eat. obviously steak or any dry meat like jerky or overly cooked chicken, he cannot eat. He tries a little bit and he ends up just spitting it out. So his food has to be very well cooked and quite soft. And yeah, there is nothing they're going to be able to do about that until he's a full-grown adult, when he stops growing, which I think for guys is about 21 to 25. But with that said, let's move down to his shoulders. So his shoulders are very tight. So with muscle contractures, basically his muscles are like scar tissue. And if you know what scar tissue is, there's no give. It doesn't stretch at all. It's very tight. So his body, his limbs were all very tight at birth. And they gave us exercises and stretches to do with him to to loosen them up a little bit. And he hated it. Whenever we would do his stretches, he would scream. And I really hated doing them, but they needed to be done. So we persevered. And the reason for that is they needed his biceps and his triceps to be quite a bit stronger, because when Connor was still an infant, we were already home from the NICU, but when he was still like a month old, we had a phone call with an orthopedic surgeon down in Vancouver who works on upper extremities. And his plan for Connor is to do a muscle transfer, taking from his triceps and moving them to his biceps, because already at birth they noticed that his triceps were stronger than his biceps. So that was their long-term plan. And they said it probably happened between the ages of 4 and 5, so around the kindergarten. And so they said we need to strengthen his triceps. So do exercises, play, all the things to hopefully strengthen his triceps so that we can do the surgery. And I'll get into that in just a minute, but I'm just going to go through all of Connor's limbs. And so when we came back home, we saw a different orthopedic surgeon in Prince George, the city where we live, or close to where we live, that works on lower extremities, so hips, knees, and feet. And he's the doctor that worked on Connor's club foot. We've had him from day one. I heard about him before Connor was even born, and he's the doctor that performed Connor's club foot surgery in April of this year. And so we've had him from the beginning, and we really like him. We hope we never ever lose him, because he's probably one of my favorite doctors on Connor's team. And there have been a few. But anyway, he did an x-ray on Connor's hips to see if the arthrogryposis was in his hips, and it wasn't. His hips are totally fine, they're totally normal. And so he didn't think arthrogryposis was technically in his left foot either. He figured it was just a clubbed foot. But then the older Connor got, and the fact that his foot relapsed and was still very tight, the doctor had said, you know what, when kids are born with clubbed feet, if they correct real easily, then we know it's not part of the arthrogryposis for kids who actually have arthrogryposis, because a lot of kids with clubbed feet just have clubbed feet and they're totally healthy. But in Connor's condition, since only one of his feet was clubbed and it straightened really well but didn't remain there, it curved back in like I showed in previous videos. He figures that the arthrogryposis is affecting his left foot, and that is why it is clubbed and relapsed. So that's why they did an open foot surgery, because technically for the surgery that he did, it could just be a closed foot surgery, which I don't know how they do that, but it was open foot. So Connor's got, now that his cast is finally off, we see there's 3 scars on his foot, one in the back, one on the front and the top, and one on the front on the side. So 3 separate procedures done in one surgery. But anyway, with that being said, along with all of those things, Connor has to wear elastic bands, like a wrap around his arms and wrists for half an hour a day, because his palms, the automatic position for his hands is to flip up. When he's resting, they flip up. Where us, when we rest, our hands are down. His always do this. So these wraps are supposed to pull his hands in, and it'll become more natural, because he'll try to do this. But the OT who got them for us, she tried them on me first so I would know how they feel. And honestly, when you put them on, they automatically turn your hand this way. So Connor, when he wears them for his 30 minutes a day, they automatically turn his hands down and then his hands like this in a resting position. So that is really good. It's funny, when he was born, his left hand, the arthrogryposis in it looked so much worse than his right hand. So automatically I'm like, oh, this kid is going to be right-handed because his left hand looks so bad. The contractures in his fingers were so bad, and to this day they are a lot worse than his right hand. But with that being said, the muscles in his left hand are stronger than the ones in his right hand. And so at birth, we were putting splints, and they're just so itty bitty. I put them in a container in his baby box, which is in the crawl space, because they are just so stinking cute. But as he grew, we got bigger ones, different shape, different size, all the things, because his wrists were stuck in like this position, and you could not get them up. They were just stuck there. And so these splints slowly moved his wrist so his hand would go up. And at one point his splints did have his hands in this position, and he had to wear them for night. And by doing that, we're able to stretch some of the muscles in his hands so that he could passively we could move his hand up. So he wouldn't be able to do it independently, but with our help, his hands would go all the way up. And so with that OT, she's also down in Vancouver, and we see her once a year. Whenever we would go there, she would make us new splints. And this last time that we were there, so this last Vancouver trip that I posted about a month ago, she checked his hands, and his left hand was really good. She had no concerns about it, but his right hand was losing strength. It was getting tighter, so kind of relapsing. So now she couldn't passively even bring it up very far. So now Connor is back in a splint, like this, to wear at night to hopefully stretch those muscles again so we can passively move his hand back up. Connor is currently wearing a brace. Yeah, so his cast came off on June 3rd. Connor is currently wearing a brace on his left foot because he was walking prior to this surgery. And with the cast, obviously you can't walk. And now with the cast off, his leg is quite weak, and he has lost all strength and all momentum and courage to continue walking. So I feel like we're sadly back at square one with that, and it's quite discouraging, especially for his parents, me and Brent, because we're back to basically lugging almost a 6-year-old around like a toddler, and he's getting so heavy, and it was just so nice when he could walk. But I know we'll get there. It's just a matter of time for his foot to gain strength and his foot to stop hurting. And so we're seeing his orthopedic surgeon again on July 17th, and I'm hoping by then he's walking, and if not, I'm really counting on our doctor to give us some ideas on how to encourage the movement and to encourage walking again. But anyway, that is all the arthrogryposis. Oh, there's one more. So his eye, that's another topic we haven't talked about yet. So if you remember back to his eye surgery video, he has something called DVD, distorted vertical deviation in his left eye, which means the muscle in his eye wanders. We kept pulling his eye up, and they had to tether that muscle to bring it back down. So once a day for 2 hours, we have to patch his good eye to make his left eye work so that muscle doesn't get tight again and start pulling his eye up. But the only thing with that is when they do this surgery on his left eye, there's a very high chance of his right eye doing it too. So we are now seeing the ophthalmologist in Prince George, so we don't actually have to see the surgeon who did it in Vancouver anymore for now, but she has us seeing an ophthalmologist in Prince George every 6 months to continue monitoring his eyes, because that right eye surgery is definitely going to happen in the future. We just don't know when. It's just a matter of when his right eye is finally going to start moving, I guess, or the muscle getting tight. I'm hoping with a lot of prayer that it won't, and then the surgery won't happen, but they did say the likelihood of it happening is very, very high. But that's all the arthrogryposis stuff. So let's talk a little bit about Connor's autism assessment. So Connor tested positive for being autistic. They have him as a level 2 on the I don't know how you call it, level 2 autism. So there's 3 levels, 1, 2, and 3, and 1 is being very mild, 3 is being very severe. Connor is right in the middle. Actually, he's more closer to 1 than 2, but with some of it, they just bumped him up to a 2. So I'm going to read, because they gave me this whole 27-page long thing or book on Connor's entire test. So I'm just going to read a little bit from the assessment summary. Connor is a 5-year-old boy who was referred for a comprehensive psychological assessment to understand his social, emotional, learning, and cognitive profile and determine if he meets DSM-5-TR criteria for a diagnosis of autism and/or any other mental disorders. Connor's parents, or anyone who knows him, describe him as a curious and sweet child who loves playing Super Mario and spending time with his little sisters. Connor's overall cognitive ability as measured by the full-scale intelligent quotient fell in the extremely low range. However, because his performance varied significantly across tasks, this should be interpreted with caution. His abilities are better understood by examining the specific cognitive domains described. So verbal communication. Connor's ability to access and apply word knowledge fell in the extremely low range. Fluid reasoning. His ability to solve new problems without relying on past knowledge also fell in the extremely low range. While he grasped the initial sample items during a pattern completion task, he quickly began to struggle with comprehension. Similarly, on a picture matching task, he succeeded with the early items but had difficulty understanding the activity once the images transitioned away from animals. Visual spatial. Connor's ability to understand, analyze, and manipulate visual information, both in his mind and with his hands, fell in the extremely low range. He initially managed simple block stacking tasks, but quickly struggled, often orientating blocks incorrectly and failing to follow the model. In puzzle assembly tasks, he had difficulty putting pieces together, worked slowly, and considered the puzzle complete when pieces were merely touching, even if they were not correctly assembled. Working memory. Connor's ability to attend to, hold, and manipulate information to complete a task varied. Connor's performance on a task requiring recall of animal locations within a zoo scene was in the average range. However, he performed in the very low range on a task that involved identifying previous viewed pictures from a larger group. Processing speed. His ability to quickly identify visual information and make decisions fell in the average range. It is important to note that the examiner accommodated Connor's physical limitations by marking responses with a bingo dabber as Connor pointed to his chosen items. Key conclusion. Does Connor meet the criteria for ASD? Connor's assessment included both 2 different tests, which provided together a thorough picture of his communication, social interaction, and behavioral profile. Connor demonstrates differences in social communication, such as limited reciprocal conversation and reduced use of gestures for social purposes. He shows challenges with integrating eye contact, verbal communication, and nonverbal cues, and often requires prompting to maintain interactions, even when discussing topics he enjoys. While Connor maintains consistent and strong eye contact and displays social smiles, his social overtures and responses are sometimes inconsistent, and he may have difficulty interpreting social cues or sustaining shared attention. In addition, Connor exhibits several repetitive behaviors and restricted interests. He uses repetitive language and becomes attached to certain phrases. His play frequently involves repeating actions, example, putting things in and out of boxes, or focuses on a narrow range of interests such as elevators, automatic doors, and Super Mario. He prefers established routines and rituals and displays some sensory sensitivities, including preferences around food and tactile experiences. These patterns are characteristic of autism spectrum disorder and are not fully accounted for by his physical differences. It is important to consider Connor's diagnosis of AMC, when interpreting these findings, as motor limitations can affect his ability to participate in social activities and use gestures. However, the assessment indicates that many of Connor's social communicative differences and repetitive behaviors are distinct from the effects of AMC. Based on his developmental history and current presentation, Connor meets the criteria for autism spectrum disorder. Recognizing the influence of his AMC ensures that recommendations and supports can be individualized to address both his social communicative needs and his motor challenges. So another thing that they told us Connor had was an intellectual development disorder. That's another thing they tested him for. So, does Connor meet the criteria for an intellectual development disorder? Connor does meet the criteria for an intellectual development disorder. Assessment findings indicate significant impairments in intellectual functioning, including difficulties with language-based reasoning, verbal comprehension, cognitive development, and learning relative to same-age peers. He also demonstrated substantial impairments in adaptive functioning across conceptual, social, and practical domains, including communication, self-care, home living, community use, and health and safety skills, which impact his independence and day-to-day functioning across settings. These difficulties have been present since the developmental period. Connor's presentation should be interpreted in the context of his AMC diagnosis, including associated motor and expressive language difficulties, which may affect aspects of his assessment, performance, and functional independence. Nevertheless, the overall pattern of cognitive and adaptive impairment is considered to exceed what would be expected based on his physical condition alone and is consistent with a diagnosis of intellectual development disorder. So they have him as a level 2 in the autism spectrum disorder and a mild intellectual development disorder. So that's all I'm going to read because there's a lot of recommendations in here to help Connor with these, with being autistic and his developmental disorder. But with the intellectual development disorder, they would technically like to get him tested again once he's like between 10 and 12, just to see if his disability is what is causing them to possibly think he has this disorder, or if it's not affected at all. So the reason we got him tested for autism, Brent and I kind of suspected he was already for quite a while, and this just kind of confirms what we believe. However, with that being said, the other day it really hit me that my son was autistic and that he was handicapped and clubfoot and just all of it, and my heart just broke, because it is really hard for me to see my son live like this, even though he doesn't know any different. When I see kids his age running around and I watch him watch them, I know what's going through his brain, because he has vocalized before that he can't do the things his friends can do. And so as his mom, it's really hard to watch him. But with his disability and his physical disability and his mental disability and just everything that he's dealing with, I trust that the Lord has a special plan and life for my sweet Connor to live. And I pray that Connor's life and everything that he has to deal with will show Christ's love to other people, and that God will use him to glorify him, and that Connor will be a light to this world just through everything he's been through, his testimony, all those things. So with that being said, that was a lot of information to take in a short video, or short video. It's probably around the 20-minute mark already. So I'm going to end it here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.